we're really, really happy to have Peggy Olwell speaking to us tonight. She's out in Idaho, in Boise, Idaho. Peggy is the National Plant Conservation and Restoration Program Lead for the Bureau of Land Management. She built the BLM's nationally recognized native seed program, which promotes the development and use of native plants in habitat conservation and restoration projects. She was instrumental in developing the Plant Conservation Alliance, yay, in 1994, a partnership of about 15 federal government agencies and over 400 state, tribal, and private organizations. She historically served as chair of the PCA, Plant Conservation Alliance Federal Committee, and led the effort on the 2015 National Seed Strategy. Peggy is vice chair of the IUCN's SSC North American Red List Authority and co-authored the book Seeds of Restoration Success, Wildlands and Plant Diversity in the U.S. In 2021, Peggy was named a Conservation Trailblazer in the Department of Interior's Natural Resource Conservation Achievement Awards and received the Hutchinson Medal of the Chicago Horticultural Society. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we're really lucky to have Peggy speaking to us tonight, and her talk is the National Seed Strategy for Rehabilitation and Restoration. So thank you so much, Peggy. You can take it away.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here, and it's wonderful to see some old friends, Kim and Ann and Lou and Lindsay and Linda. That's great. Just so everybody knows, I used to be in the headquarters office, which was in Washington, D.C. for the Bureau of Land Management, and then moved to Boise in the middle of COVID. So that was wonderful. That was the last administration. I'm hoping we get back to DC because I think our jobs belong there. And I'm also jealous that your spring is already coming there. We've still got snow here. It was snowing earlier today. But let's get started. I'm going to give you a national perspective of what I think is happening in plant conservation and why I see hope for the future, and hopefully get you guys engaged in plant conservation in a bigger way. So climate-induced disasters are happening in every state across America. And this map shows the type of extreme weather and climate events that are categorized as natural disasters. And this is from the period 2015 to 2020, which was the time that we had put on the first seed strategy. We started it in 2014. So since 1980, in the US alone, there have been nearly 300 weather and climate disasters that cost at least $1 billion US. And they totaled 1.9 trillion in damages. Out west, we are squarely in the middle of mega drought and mega fires. Over the past 20 years, we've had 6 million hectares or 150 million acres that have burned across the United States. And to restore these damaged ecosystems, we need a lot more native seed than is commercially available at this time. And that's true whether you're in the West or whether you're in the East. Across the United States, the commercial availability of native seed for restoration is not there. And we knew that back in, well, we've known that for quite some time, actually. But in 2014, I had a director of Bureau of Land Management, and he said to me, "Why are people telling me that native seed don't work?" And I said, because they're not using the right native seed. They're taking seed that might have a source up in, Montana or Washington State, and they're trying to put it in the Great Basin in Nevada, and it is not working. It could be native to the United States, but it's not locally native. So he said, okay, well, we're going to have to do something about that then. And I'm like, all right, let's go. So he was able to get leaders of 14 federal agencies to work together, and through the Plant Conservation Alliance, we brought 14 federal agencies together and over, I don't know, maybe 300 to 400 non-federal partners through the Plant Conservation Alliance, of which Maryland Native Plant Society is a member. So in 2015, we came out with the National Seed Strategy for Rehab and Restoration. Right there, the vision, the right seed in the right place at the right time. There's lots of variabilities for why seed might not work. And it's not all based on what kind of seed you're using. It depends upon the time of year, the machinery you're using, how you're applying it. I know for my agency alone, we were we throw seed out of airplanes in the West, and because it's such large landscapes that are being hit by the wildfires, and we're lucky if we're getting 80% of that seed germinating. So the seed strategy is to ensure that we have the right genetically appropriate seed reserves to restore these viable and productive plant communities and sustainable ecosystems. And this is going to seem really bureaucratic, but it's part of the exciting part of why I am hopeful. So EO stands for Executive Order 14008, and that is the Biden administration's executive order on tackling the climate crisis. And then BIL funding activities is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And what I want to showcase here is that the things that they are interested in, like national and economic security, federal buying power, climate resilience, 30 by 30 initiative, which is protecting 30% of the land by, 2030. All of those things have a connection to our national seed strategy. You might say, okay, what's the national and economic security that we would need seed banking for? But if you think of crop wild relatives, which most of our food crops have wild relatives, they all came from somewhere, and there's many of the indigenous Native American flora that is crop wild relatives. And so we've got seed banking for those, as well as, frankly, in my book, the materials, the germplasm that's in the southern part of our U.S. is probably going to be the materials that we may need in the future for assisted migration, especially those species that have evolved to be drought tolerant, heat tolerant. Those genes are the very ones that we may need as we get hotter and drier further north. Federal buying power, our native seed, we spend millions of dollars on seed, and we spend a lot on having people grow seed for us, and collecting seed that we're doing in the seed strategy. Climate resilience, again, we need the locally adaptive native seed. We need climate smart tools, such as those that are being developed by USGS and the Forest Service, so that we know where the source of seed is and how far we can take it from the source of the material. 28% of the US land mass is federal agency land. And so there is a real push that we protect those lands as part of the 30 by 30 initiative. And then I have to say, I'll tell you a funny story. For the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, I was sitting in my living room listening to NPR one day, and they started talking about the infrastructure law, and I was like, oh, okay. And there's just going on about how it's going to get passed, and what the Biden administration is doing. And all of a sudden they were talking about what the things were that were going to be part of the infrastructure law, and the very last thing was and seeds. And I jumped up out of the sofa and I was like, did that guy just say seeds? I mean, because it just didn't resonate that it could possibly have made it into the infrastructure bill. But folks, it did, and that is a really exciting thing for me right now. It's given me new hope that that we are going to get plant conservation on the map and restoration with the right seeds. So there's about 10 to 12 different parts of the infrastructure law. One of them's contracts, one of them grants. For all of you that are interested in invasive species, there's a big part of it that's looking at invasive species. They're talking about resilient recreation, restoration of mined land areas, and then there it is, my favorite, the National Seed Strategy literally made it into the infrastructure law in one whole section of the law. And these are the areas that are connected to the seed strategy. So obviously contracts, we have contracts for native seed collection and production, grants that we give to states and tribal agreements, invasives, recreation and mine land revegetation, all has restoration with native seeds that are needed and necessary. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the seed strategy, and this is a progress report that just came out in 2021. These are there were at least 500 projects that 17 federal agencies reported back to us on. 20 plus tribal nations were involved with it. It was projects that were in 52 states or territories, 380 partners, and what was invested $167 million in these projects that was reported back. We're sure that there's more that's happening out there that's implementing the National Seed Strategy, but we could only ask the federal agencies to tell us, what they're working on. There are links that we can get you to the seed strategy and the progress report, and a lot of information about the work that we're doing. And it's not just Western. That's the other thing I want you folks to know. This is a national seed strategy. And just because I work in BLM, which is predominantly Western lands, doesn't mean at all that this is a Western focus, okay? So this is what I've done here is to take sort of our process of how we go from wildland seed collection all the way around through the development phase of developing native seed, commercial native seed from wildland species, and then back up here to restoration. And this is the information that we got back as a request from the 17 federal agencies on what they have been doing. And so part of our wildland seed collection over the 5 years from 2015 to 2020, we made almost 9,000 native seed collections, which brings the Seeds of Success program to 26,000 collections from 43 states. And we had 278 seed collecting teams out there making those collections. And some of them at that time were in Maryland, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We have evaluation and development. Every aspect of this cycle that I've got here, or process, there's research in that. And one of the highest priority items in our seed strategy was National Academies of Sciences. And they are contracted with the BLM to do a national evaluation or assessment of the native seed needs across the United States. Also included in this was, in terms of research, 170 plus scientific reports and articles on native seed research and development. We had thousands of native seed crops that were developed by local and regional efforts in 32 ecoregions. We were working across the country with 65 plus nurseries, farms, growers, and botanic gardens engaged in production. And like I said, this was just the progress that we knew about through our federal partners. There are 21 plus regional seed partnerships that were working on production. There was over $20 million annually spent on 2 million pounds of native seed, and that was from the Western United States. Storage, we had two facilities that increased seed storage capacity to 2.1 million pounds. We have over 250 plus types of seed available for large scale restoration. And then in terms of restoration, what was reported back was 10 plus million acres that were impacted and 17 plus million sagebrush seedlings that were grown for restoring the sagebrush biome. What did it look like across the country? Like I said, it was 52 states and several territories you can see. And Maryland is right over here. Sorry, we had to take it out of the main part because it's just too small of a to get all mixed up over there. So we wanted to showcase Maryland played a role in implementing the seed strategy. And here's the kind of projects that were reported back to us. There were 21 projects in Maryland between 2015 and 2020. They addressed a wide range of conservation and restoration issues, and many of the projects addressed more than one issue at a time. So the 5 most common projects that were reported back to us were wildlife habitat restoration and wildlife corridors, seed collection, climate change related projects, scientific research or data collection, and then plant materials production. This is a map of our 20 years of collections through the Seeds of Success program. And what you'll see is the predominant collections are in the West. We started it in the Bureau of Land Management when we were having all of the wildfires out there, and we had no place to get the materials that we needed. I think it was probably back in 2000, after the 1999 and 2000 fire seasons, Congress asked BLM and Forest Service or directed us actually to develop a native plant materials program. And our seed collecting portion of it was really the beginning of that. And so we've been doing it for 20 years. And we've made over 26,000 native seed collections. And that's across 43 states and 93 ecoregions. And I'll show you some of the stuff from Maryland in just a minute, but just want you to know there's at least 133 Seeds of Success seed collections that were made in Maryland. And most of that was made in response to Hurricane Sandy. New England Wildflower Society, New York City, the Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank, and University of North Carolina put together a proposal to do Seeds of Success in the East after Hurricane Sandy hit. And they asked if I would write them a letter of recommendation because it was going to go to a foundation for funding. And I wrote them a letter. I ended up getting a call back going, okay, since the BLM already has Seeds of Success and this is a plant related program, and it's going to go to a wildlife foundation, it probably has a better chance of getting funded if we go to the Department of Interior, which Fish and Wildlife Service and BLM are all parts of, Park Service is part of. Why would you be interested in getting Hurricane Sandy mitigation funds? And I was like, I'd be interested in it for sure. And so that began our Seeds of Success program in the East. We were able to get that funding. And then you can see these are the teams that went out from 2015 to 2018 or 19, maybe even. So the dark blue down here is the University of North Carolina Botanic Garden teams that would go out. This is the Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank folks out of New York City. And then this is the New England Wildflower Society, but now actually they're called Native Plant Trust. But one of the really exciting things from this is that the Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank, Regional Seed Bank, collected over 1,000 pounds of Spartina alternifolia, which is a dune. It's a salt marsh cordgrass. And one of the areas that got hit really hard was Prime Hook National Wildlife Refuge. And the reason that the Department of Interior was so interested in this is that there's national wildlife refuges, there's national parks that are all up and down the coastal area. And there really wasn't that much seed collection that had been done on a sort of restoration basis. And this Spartina alternifolia is recalcitrant, meaning that it cannot be stored in any seed bank for any long period of time. It loses its viability. So the folks out of New York City, out of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, ended up collecting over 1,000 pounds of that species. And it was used on one of the largest coastal marsh restoration projects on the Atlantic, and that is just to the north of you guys in, I think it's in Delaware, Prime Hook. So that in and of itself, I just found out recently that it's looking great. I haven't been there. They finished it up in 2016, the restoration project, but what I've heard is that it is one of those National Wildlife Refuge restoration projects it really took hold and it worked. So what I want to do here is talk to you a little bit about a tool that we're using in the West, which could be used by other federal agencies in the East. But at this point, I'm just going to talk to you about it because we are in desperate need of increasing the quantity as well as the quality and the diversity of species. And what was happening is that there were several growers that they didn't want to take the risk of growing these wild species because they didn't really know how they would grow, for instance, because there are no protocols for these wild species. And so what we worked out was a contract that's called indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, and it's seed increase and production. And basically what we've done is we want to have 70 forbs and 41 grasses from 35 different seed transfer zones out in the West. And we are taking, by we, I mean the federal government, is taking the risk away from the growers. So we're paying them to plant the fields as well as paying them for the seed, so that if they don't, there's a failed, crop for any reason, we're not getting the seed, we're not paying them for the seed, but we've paid them for the work. And so they're more likely to work with us on that. And I'll show you what we just started this at the end of 2018 fiscal year. So somewhere around October 1st of 2018, we started this. And as you can see, we've spent over $6.3 million on orders of over 101 pounds of seed from 55 species in 62 seed transfer zones. So I'm very excited about this because while that money went into the growers, the seed is going to go into the seed warehouse at BLM, and then we can sell it to any project that needs it. And then the money comes back into go for the next seed, or the next species, I should say, from maybe the next seed transfer zone. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with seed transfer zones, but those are the areas where seed from a different source can be effectively grown. And it's similar to the USDA seed hardiness or plant hardiness zones. And this is all source identified seed. Many of them are things that we've collected in the Seeds of Success program, and all of the provenance information of where we got the seed goes along with this seed to the grower, so that then they can get it certified that it is source identified, and we know where it came from and how far we can plant it. So that's the seed production contract. I want to just touch on this because it's going to be coming out shortly, but this was the highest priority item in the National Seed Strategy, and it was a report or a study to tell us what is the national assessment or the national need for native seed and the capacity for their supply. So this study group of unbiased folks, there are economists, there's biologists, there's botanists, there's I don't think there's seed growers in it, because I don't think they could use seed growers in a study looking at what's the need, because it really does have to be unbiased. Anyhow, they had an interim report that's online, and I think I gave Jill the contact, but it's right there, nas.edu/seed needs. The final report we are expecting any day now. I'm hoping that we get it before we get word on the infrastructure bill, because I think what this report does is it's the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine. They will take it up to Congress and give them the report with the recommendations that they will have for us to develop or to do. And it's almost perfect timing for us to have this at this time. All right. So you can keep, if you go on to the National Academy of Sciences, you can keep up with what the final report looks like. All right, another reason for of good news is this is the most attention I have ever seen plants and plant conservation get in my entire 35-year career with Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Service, and BLM. I just hope it's not too late. But what I want to show you here is Congress is paying attention, and they're directing, they're encouraging both the BLM and my program in it, as well as the seed strategy, and they're asking the department for botanical expertise. So this is the kind of language that we get with our budgets every year. This was from last year, fiscal year 21, because we're in a continuing resolution right now, which means we haven't gotten our money for 22 yet. But, you know, if you read this, the committee continues to support the Bureau's Plant Conservation and Restoration Program. They expect the Bureau to lead the Interagency Native Plant Materials Development Program, Seeds of Success, Plant Conservation Alliance, although that's now, the chair of that is now Patricia DeAngelis out of Fish and Wildlife Service. But they're also mentioning they continue to support the implementation of the National Seed Strategy. This is really important direction that our leadership in BLM is paying attention to. This is where our money comes from, Congress. This was in FY21's congressional budget language for the Department of Interior. The committee is concerned by the need to incorporate the perspective and knowledge of botanists in land management and restoration decision-making. Accordingly, the committee encourages the Secretary of Interior to establish a chief botanist in each of the Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and U.S. Geological Survey. The reason that this is important and really a huge endeavor that I think is long overdue is that these are the amount of land that Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Service, and BLM alone is 1/10 of the U.S. land mass. And we don't have enough botanists to do the kind of work that needs to be done. I think I figured out that in BLM alone, I might have one botanist for every 5 million acres of land. And that's counting me as a botanist. And I don't even get to touch the land out there because I'm in, I was going to say I'm in DC, but I'm not in DC. So the long and short of this is that Congress is encouraging the Department of Interior and our federal land managing agencies, as well as USGS, that they need to start thinking about plants, and they need to start thinking about hiring botanists and plant ecologists. So keep your eyes and ears to listening to see if there's some new jobs for botanists coming through the federal system, because Congress thinks we need them, which is really good. Okay, this is another, I want to show you that if it can happen for BLM, it can happen for any federal agency, and which is not only just federal agencies, because all of the funding that we get trickles down to the local economies of where those federal lands are. And, with the amount of money that we spend in BLM on just purchasing seed for restoration after wildfires, it's upwards of $25 million. And it is definitely going to the local economies. So I just wanted to show you that since we started, Congress basically directed BLM and Forest Service back in 2001. And we have been going up, and I'm hoping that we'll go up even further in 2022. And this doesn't even count what might come out of the infrastructure bill, which that's probably the epitome or the piece de resistance of why I am so happy. And people that know me know that I'm not always optimistic, but this infrastructure law is probably the most far-reaching law I have seen to date for plant conservation, ecosystem restoration. For the Department of Interior alone, we have $905 million that will go to the agencies and the department within the agencies within the Department of Interior. I'm not even sure how much USDA has, but as you can see here, this is just the part of the bill that I'm working on right now, and it's $200 million made available to establish and implement a national revegetation effort on federal and non-federal land, including, this is the most important part in my book, to implement the national seed strategy for rehab and restoration. And what they've said is that 70 million of it shall be made available to the Secretary of Interior, and 130 million is going to be made available, or maybe it is already available, to the Secretary of Agriculture. There are people from the Secretary on down that are noticing that there is a national seed strategy and that we do need to be restoring these native plant communities. We need to be building them resilient, and we need to ensure that what we are leaving on the landscape is a legacy for our kids and our grandkids, and that it's not destroyed habitat. And climate change is making it a little bit more difficult, but I think that in some ways it's giving us the opportunity to do what we should have been doing 20 to 40 years ago. So I think, Jill, you said you had the language for the infrastructure law. I can't tell you anything more about it other than this information, which is out there. I am on a team in the Department of Interior with National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, USGS, and several other Department of Interior agencies, where we are trying to figure out what does the language mean here, and how we can spend it. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of people interested in how we can spend it. And I think that there's opportunity here for anyone. I will say that about a week ago, I got a call from the governor of Nevada. His political analyst was reading about this, and he realized that they have done a Nevada native seed strategy that's tiered off of our national one. And so they wanted to know, how can we work with you on this? And I had to tell him I couldn't tell him exactly yet, because the lawyers and the budget people hadn't figured it out at the department level, but they were working on it. So maybe Maryland should get a native seed strategy going here. And maybe this is a 5-year, we've got 2022 to 2026 where we can work on together. And, it's as I've said to folks, the native plants are the true green infrastructure, and we all should be working on that before, we talk about the bridges and the roads and all of it. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, go for it.
And one from Brianna, who said, this is paging back a little bit in your presentation.
Yeah, that's okay.
When you said you were talking about purchasing the seeds from the contractor and then selling them, but who would you sell? Is that selling to other government agencies? How does
it's selling to, well, it's several things. The Bureau of Land Management has a seed warehouse. So when we purchase the seed and have the growers growing it, when they have it fully grown, and that can take, 3 years, 5 years, it comes back, the seed comes back to the Bureau of Land Management into our seed storage facility. And that seed storage facility can sell to BLM, they can sell to any federal agency, any tribe. They sell some of it to states as well, but realize we wouldn't be selling it to Maryland or anybody in the East, because this is all Western species on that contract that we had. So the seed warehouse sells the material to the project, the people that want to do the on the ground project. We're basically seeding the seed warehouse, so that when somebody calls up and says, I need a native blue bunch wheatgrass, they've got it there. Yeah.
The next question that I see is, are the seeds in the warehouse only used for restoration after natural disaster? Are there any other conditions that you would use that for reseeding?
Yes. They can be used for wildlife habitat. There's different parts of our agency that need seed. If there's endangered species habitat restoration that needs to occur, if there's, take for instance, the wildlife corridors that they want us to, make sure that we're connecting those corridors and that the wildlife are able to move through those areas if there's restoration that's needed for that. So that's where you get all of the different parts of our agency, such as emergency stabilization and rehab. They're the main driver of why we need seed, but every resource program within BLM needs seed.
And another question, this might be a little more technical. Are those increases in funding from 2001 onward in fixed adjusted dollars? That is to say, not just a reflection of inflation over time. And it's from Michael Wilpers. If you wanted to add to that question, Michael, that I'd appreciate that as well.
Those are just true dollars. That's how much we got. They haven't been adjusted for anything.
Well, my question is about you said 300 million going to U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, does that mean primarily the U.S. Forest Service, which is changing now under Biden, but it tends to not be environmentally prone at all? So if it would have to, assuming that is meaning mainly the U.S. Forest Service or whatever USDA agency it would let us know if it's something else. But if it's the Forest Service, how are we going to make sure they do it right?
Well, I don't know who in the Department of Agriculture is getting it. It's not 200 million though. They're getting 130 million. So they're getting 130 million at the Department of Ag. I don't know whether they're going to split it up amongst all of their agencies or if the majority of it's going to go to Forest Service. I can't answer that.
Whatever goes to the Forest Service, you have to make sure it goes to the right people in the Forest Service that are.
I wish I was queen for the day, because
Yeah.
So the question is about the botanists. In the services, do you know if any have been selected and are functioning, and if so, at what level?
I don't think any PDs have ever been written. But I'm
That's position description in federal acronym.
Yeah. Right. Sorry. Yeah. No, it was a recommendation. It wasn't a direction, but I think we will start seeing some, especially with the infrastructure bill being as plant oriented as restoration. I mean, I've been very upfront my entire career, I think, about the lack of botanists in Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Park Service. Here we are managing, a third of the United States, and we have too few botanists and plant ecologists, et cetera, in there to help, take care of those native plant communities. So I have not seen any position descriptions, and we actually put some questions up to the solicitor's office about positions, hiring more botanists. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and thumbs up that we can do it.
I have a quickie question. I noticed on the slide for the 20 years of success with the seeds that were collected, there were several states that were blank. And I noticed that it's 20 years of seeds of success. And I noticed like the state of Ohio, and specifically like the southern states, there were no seeds collected there. Was there a particular reason for that? There was no money to go there. And my agency was doing most of the collection, and we're mostly out west. But I will tell you, I forgot to say this because I mean, it's an obvious hole in that map. Yeah.
And yet those are the areas in the southern United States that are getting hammered by, floods and hurricanes and everything else, wildfires, I guess, even now. So I was very interested in moving forward with getting some Southeastern collections. And so the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative out of Tennessee is working with Fish and Wildlife Service and BLM to develop the Southeastern SOS. So I'm hoping that the next time I show that, we'll have some collections made. They just are starting off. There's they just hired the director of it, Marcello DeVitis. He was a postdoc up with Kay Havens in Chicago, and he's just started that. So next year we'll have some SOS collections, hopefully.
All right, and is that the same reason for like Ohio and southwestern West Virginia? You just weren't the funds there to.
The reason is that there's more federal lands out west than there
Ah,
are
okay,
in the east. And we do most of our collection on
federal land.
federal lands.
Yeah,
And so you guys, plants belong to the landowner. And, we do collect off of private and state and others, but with permission. And then that just takes up a whole nother, amount of time. And so you really have to have people there to help, be the personnel infrastructure needs to
Right.
be there, and you need money to do that. So
okay.
we're hoping that USDA spends some of it, because DOD is very interested in working with us in the Southeast, Forest Service, Fish and
Yeah.
Wildlife Service. So we're hoping to get it started.
Great, because they certainly need it.
Thanks for that question. I meant to say that there was a big hole there. I guess it was obvious.
I
Good.
wanted to know, so you said that, or your slide said that the monies can be spent on federal and non-federal land. It sounds so far like a lot of these contracts and stuff are just for the West, but would some of these contracts for growers to grow out seed be awarded in the East?
Well, that's what we're hoping. I've been working with the Plant Conservation Alliance to work with the other land managing agencies that have land in the East to, we know that we will be able to work better across the country if we're working together. And so that's why BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service went together on the Seeds of Success, the collection aspect of, and that's really the beginning for us of developing commercial materials, is the collection. And then, you got to get it into the hands of the growers. And I have been talking to Park Service and some of the other national leads about how we can do this across the department or our agencies, so that we can, we don't want to leave the East out. And I don't know if, oh gosh, there was a Ed Toth and Sarah Tangren. I don't know if she's on the call or not, but they did a needs assessment in the East. And, you guys have just as many issues as we do in the West. And I'm hoping that the $130 million that went to USDA, if it goes to the Forest Service, we don't want we don't want to duplicate efforts. So, if we're able to spend money in the West, Forest Service can use some of the seed that we are seeding the seed warehouse with, or they can use the contract that we've developed for the Western species, if they need those. My vision is that we would have a national interagency seed and restoration center with hubs that are eco-regional, and that the federal government agency with the most land in those eco-regions would be the ones that would have the lead on it, and help with the cost and the infrastructure.
So
That's if I could be queen for the day.
if you were a seed grower and you were watching these developments and wanted to ask a particular federal agency, who would you ask?
Well, at this point, there's nothing, we can't help you right yet, because we don't know how the infrastructure funding is going to come down. And contracting is, right now, we have a, what do I want to call it? The IDIQ, or indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, could be used as a pilot or a protocol, but it's difficult. This is going to sound like I don't want to talk to you about this. It's not that I don't want to talk to you about it. It's that contracts in the federal government are under the federal, it's very regulated, and there's so much that whoever is asking this question, I want your phone number, and I will get you in touch with the contracting person that can talk to you about this, because it's tricky, and they can get you to the people that you would need to get to.
What a great talk. I'm really excited about this. I'm a landscape architect, and I have certainly butted up against this problem on so many projects. So this is really encouraging. And my question is, you mentioned that it might make some sense for Maryland to develop a seed strategy to sort of have in place as this moves along. But what entity would be the right one to take that on?
Well, you could go touch base with the Nevada folks and go look online for the Nevada native seed strategy. I think that was a collaboration between Nevada's like 90% federal land. So it's a little different in the West than it is in the East. But my recommendation would be to talk to you could go to the Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service. You could go to Forest Service. Those are 3 federal land managing agencies that I think have land in Maryland, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
I think they all have, and start talking to them about what they would want to do. I would look at the Nevada one as an example, and I would also say that they were working with the governor's office and the Nevada Department of Agriculture to try and get growers out there, because agriculture in the United States is not happening out in the Great Basin or in the Mojave Desert, or maybe even it's not happening for our native species anyhow out there. And they're growing things like cotton and sorghum and whatever else has gotten that they can grow in that climate, but they're not used to growing these natives. And so it really does take, unless you've got growers that are all ready to go in Maryland, it really does take working with folks like the farmers in the area that you're wanting to have native seed from. But I would go to, the Maryland Department of Agriculture. I would go to Maryland.
That's great advice. Yeah.
And Carolyn, it's interesting because we recognize that the landscape architects were some of the ones that were saying to us, we don't have seed. And they would say things like, we're writing all of the specs on these properties, and we're putting down that we want natives, and we have nowhere to get them. And we started going to the National Association of, American Society of Landscape Architects about 5 years ago, when we were literally going to sort of showcase the seed strategy and get folks from the private sector to work with us, because it's one thing for federal governments to say this, but when we kept hearing it over and over again from the landscape architects. So because of COVID, I've missed those meetings, but we were working, and I hope that we got connections for the national assessment that's going to come out of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Math. That national assessment, I think they did have some of the landscape architects in there, and had, we're using them as references for some of this.
Well, thanks. That is really wonderful advice. So I don't know if maybe this is a follow-up question for Jill or other members of the Native Plant Society. If there's anyone who's interested in a little task force.
Somebody just put something in the chap that said that they were part of the Baltimore Farm Alliance. I think it was, okay, Grayson, yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Grayson. I'm a member of the Baltimore Farm Alliance, and I know there are definitely growers who would be interested in growing native flowers. I particularly am really interested, and I'm a flower grower. So if
So
anyone
one
would
of
like
the-
to,
One of the things that I think you want to be really cognizant of is that you are connecting the farmers with the people that will use it for restoration, because that's, in the West, a lot of the farmers were saying, well, we need some security about this. You want us to grow this material, but then you don't have a fire next year, so you don't order it from us. And that's part of why we're trying to seed the seed warehouse and get it into our system. We're paying forward, and then, it'll be available for others to use or buy, I should say. But just make sure that if you do this native seed strategy, that you are getting and the reason I'm saying getting the federal agencies involved is we're just getting the infrastructure and $905 million for restoration. Somebody's going to need seed to do that, whether they're in Maryland or whether they're in Montana. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs it. So get some of your growers on there with you and some of your federal agency folks.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn, did you finish everything you wanted to say?
No, I could go on for hours on this, so that will do for now, but hopefully we can follow up.
I think you may have started to say that maybe there could be a little subgroup of us who get together to work on this, which I think would be great. So we have to.
When the governor's office from Nevada is calling me about their seed strategy, that they are really excited and proud that they have done this. And I told him I couldn't tell him anything more than to send it up to the director of BLM, send it up to the Secretary of Interior. I mean, it can't hurt when this is the focus of this infrastructure bill.
And I have two questions. One is very simple. On your cover slide, there's something that looks like a hibiscus or a mallow, which I assume is a native plant. And I was curious about it.
I assumed that too.
Okay, good. Wondering what it was.
Well, I think Jill knows what it is. I wanted to make sure. I can't remember what we got it at.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see if I can remember. I'll investigate, okay?
Okay. More importantly, just
Somebody else did my slides for me, sorry.
Hibiscus moschitas.
Oh, okay, there you go.
and from my naive understanding, you've got to for example, a Western seed, you've got a warehouse, you're keeping that seed, but I assume if it came from a particular ecoregion, you can only send it back for restoration purposes to that ecoregion or something similar. Is that right?
Well, that's the way it should work, but that's not the way it works because we don't have, what we're trying to use right now are what are called provisional seed transfer zones. So they're an area, and it's U.S. Forest Service research postdoc developed them maybe 10 years ago for us, because people don't understand that there's a certain area where you can take the seed from and where you can plant it. And the Forest Service understands it very well, because when they started moving trees around and going back into a population to find out that their bored feet wasn't nearly what they thought that they were going to be getting out of that area. So they developed seed transfer zones. And they call them empirical seed transfer zones, and they would develop them for every species, which is great, except for that we've got, I don't know, probably 15,000 species that we want to be looking at, and it's going to take forever and a day to get to that. So we had this person develop provisional seed zones, and that it's under, it might be in the links that I gave you, Jill, but it's by Bower, Bower et al. And basically they tell us where we can safely plant seed. And so that's what we're using as we pay for research on each species, you know, on the workhorse restoration species. And, you know, but to get us an empirical seed transfer zone for each species takes 3 to 5 years, probably closer to 5 for that species. So it's labor intensive, expensive, and it takes a long time. So we're using the provisional ones right now.
I have a couple of things. One is a point I wanted to mention, and then a question. Sarah Tangren was actually starting to set up growers for native seed, local ecoregion native seed in Maryland. But then unfortunately, that was while she was at the University of Maryland Extension, and unfortunately, the funding for her position disappeared. So that work of hers stopped. But I know that she continues to be interested in it. I have just a quick question. As you're storing the seed, what are you doing about the storage conditions to maintain the viability of the seed? So for instance, if there aren't disasters for a particular area one year, but there are the next, is that seed still going to be as good?
So that's a issue that a lot of people don't understand, Judy. So thanks for asking the question. In terms of seeds of success, so every collection that we make through that program, there is a portion of it that goes into long-term conservation storage up at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Plant Germplasm Laboratory and Seed Storage Facility in Fort Collins, Colorado. And that is literally a bomb-proof vault system or building. And that's for the long-term material. And that the reason it's so effective is that it is a, you know, that's our national food security there. So they've got them with backup. So we've got our natives now up there in that facility. We have them as well. We have backup systems. They're also in Walla Walla, Washington at the Western Plant Introduction Center. And if they are related to a crop like allium, and there's an allium curator, then they go to that curator as well. And then they make sure that they keep the material alive and relevant. And then we also have some of our materials stored at the USDA Forest Service Bend Seed Extractory in Bend, Oregon, because that's where all of our Seeds of Success material gets cleaned. And so we keep some of it there that we're going to use for projects because they've got the facilities. So the places, as I say to folks, I can't do this program in BLM without the U.S. Department of Agriculture because they're the folks that have the facilities. Now, what I'm interested in doing for this National Interagency Seed and Restoration Center is getting a state-of-the-art seed storage facility, because the materials that we will be seeding the seed warehouse with, we're going to need to keep, that's kind of the foundation seed. And you store that in a very different place and in a different system than the way we have at our warehouse, which is where the commercial seed comes into the seed warehouse. And it's just like any seed warehouse, or it's just like any warehouse or grocery store. First in is first out, because you don't want that material. Species lose viability at different rates. And some of them, like sagebrush need, sagebrush need cooler temperatures. So we have to have refrigeration in these areas. You will lose sagebrush viability. You can lose it in as 6 to 18 months, I think is what they say. And we do not want to be putting seed out there that's lost its viability. Now, where the BLM seed warehouses are, they're very dry, which is what you want. And so that's the good news, but our stuff is not meant, the seed warehouses that we have on BLM land, it's not meant for long-term seed storage. It's the stuff you're going to use for restoration. So, we hope that we have viability issues taken care of with, we have freezers. I think we have like 2.1 million pound capacity. One of them's here in Boise, one of them's in Ely, Nevada. And then in both of those, I think we have 200,000 or 300,000 pounds of cold storage.
Is there a role for individual volunteers to be collecting seed?
So we don't use individual volunteers. It's just because it's very difficult for us to be able to manage that. So we have a contract that's a botanical services contract that we go, and we've got different regions of the country, and we use contracts with folks. Originally, we were using interns, and we had, I was trying to get the next generation of land stewards engaged with us. So we had a intern program called Conservation and Land Management Intern Program for recent college graduates. But we had to stop that, I don't know, maybe about, in 2018, we stopped that and went to this contracting because it was easier for us to get folks. And then, especially with COVID and everything else, we had everybody's working outside of the offices. So it's kind of switched things up a bit. But it's not to say that you couldn't have groups that were, contracted with some of the federal agencies to do it, to do the collection. But you'd have to work that out with the agency that you're collecting for.
I've met Ed Toth up in New York, and he did great work up there. And I was actually going to say that I have collected with him and his group as a volunteer when I was part of the Long Island Native Plant Initiative. So they did do that. They gave a training session and took people out and did some collecting. So that is possible if you have the right kind of setup going.
Yeah, right.
And I'm kind of wondering how large scale a particular seed grower needs to be. I'm sort of thinking about this in terms of, can it be that I deal with this ecotype problem all the time and worry about, genetic swamping from landscaping plants and all the cultivars and all those kinds of issues, and that the public really has a hard time accessing quality local ecotype plants. So, and you can hear it from the audience here. People are asking, how can I do this? How can I help? So I'm wondering, is there a scale to this? Is it necessary that it be on acres or many acres, or can it be at a half an acre level or something like that, that people could grow certain species, or, just, do you have a sense of that?
Well, I think especially for the East, it definitely can be. And I think, it's going to depend upon what the need is out there from either whoever the land managers are. And there's more than just federal land managers that need this. And I think that that's part of why I suggest you pull together a seed strategy, pull together, Ed Toth has retired from New York City Parks and Rec, but he took the Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank with him, and he's still actively interested and engaged. And frankly, he's part of the study group that's doing the National Academy of Science study on the seed assessment. So, I don't know if you have his email or, I would touch base with him. And because I think he really is trying to get engaged in a bigger, broader way in the Mid-Atlantic. And he knows Sarah too, because I think that they worked on that assessment together.
Yeah, I could reach out to Ed. I know him.
Yeah, I would.
That would be interesting. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I didn't mean to sound like that volunteers aren't useful or necessary or anything like that, but you have to have the infrastructure to deal with them. And he had it there in New York, which was, not only did he have the infrastructure, he had the population of people that would do it. And, here in the West, a lot of times we need the collections out in Nowheresville, and the safety of people and all of that is something that makes it difficult for us to use volunteers for this, but it can be done.
Mhm.
And I'm glad to hear that you were doing it.
I did. It was fun.
Yeah, I know. I just got a social scientist researcher that wants to. We have trained over 2,500 seed collectors, and this social science researcher wants to see what that effect is on where these people went in their career. And I'm really excited to see what happens with that, because let's just say I need the next generation to follow behind, because I'm gray-haired and ready to give it over to the next generation.
It should make you happy to know I'm now a native ecotype grower.
Yay!
Very small scale, but I'm doing it. So
That's great. That's great. We'll call Ed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. And watch out for the National Academy of Science, because they're going to be making recommendations to us federal agencies. And if you are growing stuff that somebody in a forest would need, or somebody in, we probably can hook you up with some of the folks. I have the national level connections, but maybe what we really need to find out are who are the local people that are in some of those agencies in your area. I don't know where are you, Lauren? Are you in?
I'm in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Oh,
and I'm
okay.
also thinking that, the other thing that would be interesting to know is what species have been collected regionally. I'm sure there's holes, right? There's no way they got everything.
Yeah,
right?
we only, did I not tell you what we collect? I think there's only 133 species that we collected.
Right.
And that was mostly coastal plain stuff. Actually, Ed would know that. And University of North Carolina, they came up into Virginia. I don't know how
your map showed mostly they were Maryland. Mostly it was North Carolina. Okay. Yeah.
University of North Carolina. And that the person you could talk to there at the University of North Carolina Botanic Garden is a guy named Johnny
Randall.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Randall. And I think if you just call the UNC Botanic Garden, you can probably get his office from there.
I have his email too. He's a really nice guy.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Thank you for answering these questions really thoroughly.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate your
I
talk so much.
appreciate
Thank
this. And I appreciate the flora of Maryland. I miss it. So
yeah, she was a resident here for decades. She lived over in Kensington, right? So yeah, so she knows what we're dealing with around here.
Yep. And they're also, just so everybody knows, there's also in the infrastructure bill a lot of money for the invasives. So I don't know if there's a way to get engaged in that too,
Yeah, it's really good to know that. And It's really
All
exciting.
right. Well, Jill, you know how to get hold of me. So if there's any other questions, just give me a holler. And if you need any links to anything, I'm happy to provide that too.
Great. I think you sent me a lot, and I'll put them on the
Okay.
website. I'll work with Karen Molinas and we'll get them on the website.
Okay. Sounds
Thank
good.
you so much, Peggy. It was
Well, you're
wonderful.
welcome. And thanks everybody for all the work you do on, I don't get my hands dirty anymore. So I'm glad somebody is getting their hands dirty and keeping those native plant populations going. Thanks
Great.
again.
Okay.
Yes,
Yay.
Ann?
Thanks, Peggy.